enforcing abortion law, and holding the killing centers accountable. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Melanie Lyon, Executive Director of Voices for Life, voicesforlife.com. Voices for Life is a pro-life group in Indiana that is on the front lines to end abortion and cultivate a culture of life with efforts focused on outreach, enforcement, and door-to-door activity. We're blessed to have Melanie Lyon back with us today. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Melanie, how are you today?
Hi, Jim. I'm doing great.
Awesome. Great to have you back with us. And so what caught the eye here and prompts us to get an update with you, which we're very grateful for today, is a press release from Thomas More Society. Came out last month entitled Indiana Health Department Concedes Lawsuit, Agrees to Release Previously Withheld Abortion Records. Thomas More Society and Voices for Life secure release of Indiana abortion records. So give us an update here. What is this all about? What's going on here?
We were very excited about this settlement. So a big part of our work, as you mentioned, with Voices for Life is ensuring the enforcement of abortion laws here in Indiana. And we, previously to Indiana's abortion ban going into effect, would request what are called terminated pregnancy reports from the health department. What these reports are a document that an abortionist has to submit for every abortion that's performed that provides information so that the state and the public can evaluate provider compliance with the law. So information like the age of the baby, the type of abortion procedure, the doctor that performed it, whether there were certain type of complications. These have been public records since the 1970s. So we would request them, and we would have a trained team go over each document. And ever we found what looked like a violation of the law, we would submit a complaint to both the Attorney General's office and the Indiana Department of Health. And we, over the course of about 2.5 years, we'd submitted complaints about 701 issues that we had identified on TPRs. And there were fairly significant issues, a maternal death at Lois and Eskenazi Hospital in Indiana, abortions apparently happening on unlicensed facilities, abortions on minors, according to these documents, going unreported. It's not really a surprise to us that an industry that profits off the taking of innocent human life also doesn't care about women's health and whether the facility is clean and that sort of thing. But we were submitting a lot of complaints. Our abortion ban, our partial abortion ban, went into effect in August of 2023. And at that point, the Indiana Department of Health said they were no longer going to release terminated pregnancy reports to the public. Their argument was that because our law restricted abortion, there would be less TPRs, so it would be more likely to identify a patient based on a TPR than it would have previously when there was a significant amount of TPRs coming out. We always thought it was a stretch because there is some patient information on a TPR, but it's very limited. So the type of information that, say, on a police report would be redacted, like a name, a personal phone number, an address, all of that stuff, most of it isn't even requested on a TPR, and all of it would be redacted. So there's limited patient information like age on the document. But that's necessary for enforcement purposes, because one of the things that we would look for is if an abortion was performed on a minor, that has to be reported to DCS right away, because that girl's probably in a situation of abuse. But their argument was that this was due to privacy concerns. We had issues with the health department in terms of enforcement, with them dismissing complaints based in the media, claiming that there was some sort of computer glitch that was causing TPRs to show that abortions were happening in licensed facilities. They would send us documents in an extremely unorganized format. So we'd been facing pushback for a while, and then it kind of culminated in them saying, we're not going to give you this documentation anymore. And so we filed a lawsuit represented by the Thomas More Society on May 1st of last year, arguing that the health department was violating APRA law for failing to release these reports, public records law. And during the course of that litigation, two Indiana abortionists, and this will become more relevant soon, they filed to become defendants in the case, Dr. Caitlin Bernard and Dr. Carolyn Rouse. So they were submitting briefs essentially arguing that these reports should not be released. In February of this year, we were able to reach a settlement with the health department guaranteeing the release of these reports. And we created a settlement agreement that would allow for certain information on a TPR to be redacted that we didn't need to for enforcement purposes. So like a woman's race was on there and the number of live births that she had. And this information is on a TPR, so we can just gather socioeconomic data about abortion, which could be helpful for legislative purposes. But it's not necessary to have that individualized information that can be aggregated, we argued. So even though there's no evidence that a TPR has ever led to the identification of a patient, we wanted to be sensitive to concerns about patient privacy because our interest is enforcement. And so in the settlement agreement, we requested, we signed an agreement that said that we would only need certain fields of a TPR that were absolutely necessary for enforcement work. And so that settlement was signed, I believe, on February 2nd.
Okay. All right. So, a couple things here. For those that are listening and might be wondering, this seems very interesting. It also goes in line, if you were listening to the episode last week with Missy Martinez-Stone of the Center for Client Safety, it kind of seems like very similar work to what they're doing on a national level here on a statewide level in Indiana. I know that there are folks, I've heard from several actually after we did that show last week, that are very interested in learning more about how they can be a part of some of this sort of investigation in their own local area. So first and foremost, any advice that you would give folks in their local area, how can they find out if there's any such state reporting in their state? And then if so, how to access those things and review those things from one who has done it, is doing it, any advice that you'd give?
I definitely encourage people to do that because it's a very effective tool in pushing cultural change. Our central mission at Voices for Life is to change the culture in Indiana to be completely pro-life. And exposing the abortion industry really pushes cultural change because for us, just hearing the statement that a facility or a doctor kills children is enough for us to take notice. But for some people, and it's because our culture is so desensitized on the issue, it takes learning about how filthy facilities can be and the law breaking that a certain doctor has had. It takes that kind of extra push to hit home what exactly abortion does to a child. And so learning about this information, submitting complaints, but also just sharing it with your pro-life friends is really effective. Now, not all states, most states don't require the submission of terminated pregnancy reports, but some of them do. The best place to get that information would be to read your state's abortion code, which isn't exactly light reading, but it's accessible on most state government websites. If you have questions, most states also have public access counselors that could advise on whether certain information is collected and whether it would be publicly available. Even if your state doesn't require the submission of TPRs or the release of TPRs, there is other information that you can get from a public records request. So other documentation that we have received and shared is inspection reports from facilities, which have covered some really egregious things here in Indiana. 911 calls, transcripts are, I believe, public record in every single state with minimal redactions. What we would do is we would request 911 calls from the abortion centers. And then when we found ones that were at all incriminating on our social media page, we would create videos and publish those and push those out. So the public is just informed on the type of issues that a facility is having. Abortionist license applications are generally public record too, so that also could be requests from the state. And then I know the Center for Client Safety really encourages this, but if you are a sidewalk advocate or if you know sidewalk advocates, a lot of complaints have been submitted based on testimony from the advocates about stuff that's going on at the clinic. So maybe you're interested in enforcement work, you're not interested in sidewalk counseling. Get to know the sidewalk counselors in your community and learn about what's going on at the abortion facility, because they're the eyes on the ground. They can see a lot that even the health department doesn't have access to necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, very good. And so, so one prong then is the exposure, exposing what's really going on here, the unlawful activity, which we already know, the sadly lawful activity, so-called lawful under an unjust law that allows the ongoing daily mass murder of our littlest brothers and sisters. We know that's going on in there, but then also this unlawful side being exposed by getting access to this information. But also, what about the actual accountability, the actual enforcement then? If they're breaking the law and you can get reports that show that they're breaking the law, what have you seen on this? So you, as you said, you've discovered about 701 instances of apparent legal activity among abortion providers there in Indiana. Have you seen prosecutions? Have you seen enforcement and accountability based on you reporting what you have found?
There isn't a precedent of that happening in Indiana. Not with any of our complaints yet. A majority of the investigations are still pending, or they've been forwarded to the Medical Licensing Board. But when we get back, I can talk about the Ulrich Kloffer case, which shows exactly how the complaint submitted on TPR resulted in him losing his license and 3 abortion facilities shutting down.
Excellent. All right. We're going to hear about that when we get back with Melanie Lyon in just a moment. Again, you can find Voices for Life over at voicesforlife.com. You can also go to their Facebook and Instagram pages at Voices for Life Official. You can find them there. We're going to be right back with Melanie. Stay tuned.
iCatholic Mobile is a proud sponsor of the Station of the Cross. Your cellular service should work when you need it. Dependable calls, reliable data, and customer service you can count on. iCatholic Mobile provides nationwide 5G service, unlimited talk and text, and free roaming in Canada and Mexico. And every plan helps sustain the Station of the Cross, keeping faith-filled programming on the air. More info at iCatholicMobile.com.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Melanie Lyon, Executive Director of Voices for Life, of voicesforlife.com. Melanie, please share with us about that case that you were mentioning just before the break.
Yes. When I was growing up, before I got full-time into this work, there were a lot of legal battles fought over the abortion mill here in South Bend, Ulrich Kloffer's abortion facility. He had 3 facilities in Indiana: South Bend, Fort Wayne, and Gary. And we knew there were significant issues with his facility, and various pro-life activists throughout the state, what they would request the TPRs that came from Kloffer's facility, and when they identified a violation or a potential violation, they would submit a complaint to the health department. And a woman named Lynn Scherschel, who's a beautiful pro-life activist who's in her 80s now, she submitted a complaint based on a TPR that she received from the health department from Kloffer that indicated that he had not reported an abortion on a minor to DCS. And this complaint, along with some other enforcement work, led to a hearing before the Medical Licensing Board in 2016. And in that hearing, they revoked his license, and he was forced to stop performing abortions in Indiana. He also admitted under oath in that hearing a case which was not... It didn't come from a TPR, but he had sent a 12-year-old back to her abuser, and he had known that that was what happened. And testimony like that led the licensing board to suspend his license, and his facilities had to cease operation. He performed 30 to 40,000 abortions in his time, and he would have continued if it hadn't been for people like Lynn who were requesting that information and submitting complaints. But it led to his clinics shutting down. And as some of your people may know, when he passed away, police found over 3,000 2,000 fetal remains in his garage that he had preserved from abortions that he had performed, which, talking to the people on the ground, they had suspected something like that, which is another thing that you could potentially request via public records request, because some states require that abortionists have an agreement with a medical waste facility to remove fetal remains, and Klopfer, I believe, had issues. So that's another kind of creative way that you can target your local abortion mill.
Now, I remember when I was in New York, in Rochester, New York, to be exact, I remember looking into it some in terms of when was the last time that these abortion centers even had a health inspection. Now, this is the, politically liberal state of New York. And what I found was that I don't believe that there was documentation of any sort of health investigation inspection for like over 10 years or something just absurd. And so I remember bringing this to the chief of police at the time, and I mean, he basically shrugged like, yeah, it's not going to happen, So, I mean, I guess in states like that in New York, we can request, I guess, an inspection. But is there anything further that you would that you would advise can be done to try to actually get an inspection, something going on in a very liberal state like New York, California, Massachusetts, or are our hands pretty much tied because of the political government situation?
Getting inspections would be difficult. I know sometimes submission of an official complaint requires an investigation. So that's something that had happened in Indiana. We know clinics were inspected because we submitted complaints there, but it's unlikely the case in liberal states. Aside from if you were able to get a patient to submit a complaint, that would be most likely, I think, to result in some sort of litigation or inspection. But it is difficult. One of the things that we did at an abortion clinic in Indianapolis when it was still open is we got the violations from an inspection report that the clinic had, and we printed them on signs, and then we stood outside the facility with these signs that said, this clinic failed to appropriately store medication, that sort of thing, and we stood in front of the facility with those violations. So we couldn't get the health department to do anything about it, but we were able to educate patients about what the facility was doing. We also printed it on cards, and that was a part of the sidewalk counseling packet that we would give to patients, was the type of violations that this clinic had. And so for your safety, before you get any sort of procedure here, we want you to know about the violations that this clinic has had on an inspection report, which at the very least, you're educating patients about what's going on and hopefully driving business away from the clinic.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I have done that myself. I think in Rochester, I tried that a bit. And the sad thing is that, again, you've got to earn trust so quickly. That's one of the challenges of doing the sidewalk counseling, the advocacy there. And so oftentimes, the reaction was like, well, I don't trust you. I don't believe what you're telling me, right? And so any ways that we can build trust quickly on the sidewalk to back up the information that we're sharing, any little tips that you have there? How can we build trust? We're trying to basically build trust with folks that we've never met before instantaneously. Any thought on how we can best do that?
Well, print your sources. Like I mentioned, like reading a code is not light reading, but it's much easier to reject, a little card that summarizes information. While if you printed, say, an inspection report with the highlighted violations and handed that to someone, it would be much more difficult for them to just completely dismiss that. We've also shared negative reviews that a clinic has had, and that I think is helpful for patients because it comes from past patients. So it's not something that's coming from me. I'm not, I have led negative reviews for clinics, but past patient bad experiences. So I've encouraged people to look at this facility's Google reviews and they might look them up and they're negative. And again, this is coming from patients. And so that sort of do your own research, being kind of simple, can be helpful in building patient trust. But it is difficult when you have 2-3 minutes to talk to somebody, unfortunately.
Yes, yeah, but no, that's great. A great tool to have in the toolbox there. Great information to share that might make the difference. So again, we're talking with Melanie Lyon today, Executive Director of Voices for Life, voicesforlife.com. Let's go back to those 700 possible that seems to be apparent illegal activity instances of finding this in these reports. But you're saying that there hasn't been a whole lot of response, I guess, from you finding these things and then sharing these things with the authorities yet. Is it just that it takes a long time for some reason in the process? What is your thought as you think about it? Because that's a lot of instances if there haven't been any sort of accountability, prosecution, enforcement.
Part of the issue, I think, has been the health department's lack of interest in enforcing the law. And the Attorney General can, we have a pro-life Attorney General here in Indiana. He can push some things, but the health department does have a lot of jurisdiction. We were optimistic with a new governor coming into Indiana, Governor Mike Braun, who was very pro-life, or supposedly very pro-life, and he had issued an executive order mandating, within a couple of days of him being sworn in, mandating that the health department follow all abortion regulations, including those regarding reporting. And so we were optimistic with the new administration coming in that we would be able to get more ground on these complaints with hopefully a friendlier health department. I think also in Indiana, our abortion ban going into effect, which is a really good thing, but it has caused some feet to slow, because for some people they see it as the issue being moot, unfortunately. And we still haven't received TPRs post our abortion ban going into effect because of the health department, and then this new lawsuit of two abortionists suing us to prevent the prevent the release of this documentation. So we were hoping to make more ground, but the abortionists threw a wrench in our gears, unfortunately, which I can go over that now if we've got time.
Sure, yeah, feel free.
So days after our settlement was signed and announced, two Indiana abortionists, Caitlin Bernard and Carolyn Rouse, filed a lawsuit against us and the health department to prevent the release of terminated pregnancy reports. They requested a restraining order that would prevent the health department from releasing them, and then they told us to shred or delete any TPRs that we would receive as a result of the settlement. And the restraining order was granted, and there was a preliminary injunction hearing last week to prevent the release, as there's ongoing litigation. And we haven't had a ruling yet, but we'll see. What's interesting is that these doctors are arguing that release of this documentation will violate patient privacy. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Caitlin Bernard, but she was the Indiana abortionist that performed the abortion on a 10-year-old from Ohio who had an abortion right after the Dobbs decision came out. She shared this information with a reporter from the Indy Star, and it resulted in a media storm. The girl was identified. Telemundo showed up on her doorstep. Dr. Bernard did a huge amount of press. She was in Vanity Fair, CNN. Kamala Harris called her a hero for what she had done. That call was published, and so the medical licensing board ended up fining Dr. Bernard $3,000 for violating HIPAA law for sharing this girl's information with a reporter. And this was the first time an Indiana abortionist had been disciplined by the licensing board since Dr. Kloffer came out. But it's very ironic to us that Dr. Bernard is suing us for issues of patient privacy, even though she has a history of exploiting her own patient story for her own gain.
Wow. And so That's very interesting. So they actually were able to get this restraining order in effect. So this was it just one individual judge there in Indiana that put this restraining order in effect?
Mm-hmm. Judge in Marion County, which is typically the most liberal part of Indiana. So we weren't surprised when it came down, unfortunately.
Okay, so with your good lawyers there at the Thomas More Society, so you are appealing this, and so where does it go from here?
So we're waiting for the preliminary injunction to come down. I don't know whether that's going to be granted. If it is, we will certainly appeal, and so the case will go to the appellate court. But we are, again, represented in this new litigation by the Thomas More Society, and we're both committed to continuing to fight for the release of this documentation. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, this is... it's terrible that you have to face this backlash when this should be a clear-cut issue. This is not something new. These reports have been going on for many years in the state of Indiana, and now all of a sudden they're trying to change this, and they're actually able to push this forward somehow. It needs to be corrected, obviously. So good to hear that Thomas More Society is fighting the good fight on this. But as you know, the pro-abortion side, part of the game they play is to just drag things out as long as they possibly can to inflict as much damage as they can. We're going to be right back with more with Melanie Lyon. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Melanie Lyon, Executive Director of Voices for Life, voicesforlife.com. And I want to, look at things from this perspective. The state of Indiana is a very Republican state. Now, this is our so-called pro-life party, certainly much better than the rabid pro-abortion party that is the Democrats. But sadly, what we see here, this is a deep red state, Indiana. You look at the politics of it, and Republicans have held the governor's office since 2004. Republicans hold supermajorities in the Indiana General Assembly with 40 out of 50 state Senate seats and 70 out of 100 state House seats. All 5 state Supreme Court justices were appointed by Republican governors. So the Republicans have all the governmental power and judicial power here in the state. They could set whatever law they want with respect to child murder, to abortion, and have any sort of enforcement that they want. They're in charge of all of this. So they do have a pretty strong ban of abortion, although not complete, right? That has been effective since August 1st of 2023. Melanie has mentioned this, and this is basically, it says that under this legislation, abortions are prohibited at any point during pregnancy, with exceptions in specific circumstances, and the ones that are listed here: fatal fetal anomalies, rape or incest, saying pregnancies resulting from rape or incest may be terminated, but only up to 10 weeks post-fertilization, and then risk to the mother's life or physical health. It says Indiana law does not apply these abortion restrictions to in vitro fertilization procedures. So certainly incomplete in terms of upholding the dignity of the human person at the earliest stages of development. And so, look, this is why we're calling for the U.S. Supreme Court to affirm the constitutional personhood of the preborn under the 14th Amendment, and thereby affirm equal protection for all preborn children nationwide, ending all forms of child murder, including abortion, abortifacients, IVF, any experimentation or harvesting, abolish all these evils against innocent human life, and affirm the fundamental right to life for all. And then get to work on the healing that is needed and the building up of an authentic civilization of truth and love as is right and fitting in our nation. This certainly seems the way to go. And more and more people hopefully waking up to this and saying that, this is an all or nothing thing. It's going to be all one way or all the other. We either respect human life from the earliest stages or we do not. And it seems like the pro-life side on this, at least politically, not really getting that message, not having that conviction, as Melanie, you stated earlier, it seems like maybe there are many you've encountered in the state of Indiana where they just think like, well, that law that they've passed, yeah, it's kind of enough. And now let's just kind of move on from now. It's not enough. There's still much work to be done. And so I guess anything that strikes you on this, that you're fighting, you're fighting so much just to get these reports, that this ought to not be a fight at all, especially in this Republican state, to be able to just get these reports. I don't know, any reflection you have on it, that it seems like the so-called pro-life party is not really pushing, does not have the conviction to keep going, and really end this as we ought to do. But your thought on it?
We are grateful to the Indiana Assembly for passing our partial abortion ban. They did do it very fast. I think they were the first one to pass one post-Dobbs, other than have the states that had trigger laws. And there was a significant amount of backlash at the State House when our ban was passed. There was a big day where a bunch of pro-life people came to the State House to pray and sing and lobby for preborn children. And then there was a huge pro-abortion rally the day before. I remember going into the State House during the pro-abortion rally. We had a press conference with some pro-life legislators and walking just around the building, and everyone was screaming. Everyone was screaming just horrible things, wishing for the pro-abortion legislation to happen. I remember praying the rosary. I was like literally the only one who was walking down the hall who was not screaming. And I think that backlash probably is one of the reasons that we have this mindset in the General Assembly, that they made their big stance and then that's it. We're going to kind of wash our hands clean of this issue. And so, yeah, I'm grateful that they passed it, but they can't pretend like this isn't an issue. Our abortion ban has some holes in it. So you talked about the rape and incest exception. There's no police report, no documentation required for a woman in order to get an abortion under this exception. And so a woman, I believe she has to sign an affidavit, but no proof has to be given. She just needs to sign that, and then she can be given the abortion. And our concern is that if we're not able to see this documentation, the TPRs, we can't really see if our ban is being enforced. And there was, so the health department does release quarterly reports that has like aggregated data about Indiana abortion. And the most recent set that we've got, 4 abortions were performed and TPRs were not submitted. And obviously 4 children losing their life is horrible. But you might say, well, it's only 4 abortions. You used to have 600-700 a month in Indiana. The issue, these lives being lost, but also it's beginning to set a terrible precedent. If they can get away with TPRs not being released, maybe we can get away with TPRs not even being submitted to the health department, which is one of the reasons that we're so invested in winning this case, because we're in a fairly good position now in terms of low abortion numbers. But if the health department continues to be lax on enforcement, then who knows what the other side is going to try to get away with.
Yeah. And I am seeing here, as far as what you were talking about, the enforcement on the rape and incest exception, it seems like there's proposed legislation for a bill that would require the woman seeking an abortion to file an affidavit as attesting to the assault. But currently, it seems like all that's required is a proposed affidavit requirement. Well, no, that was the one that's not yet enacted into law, the one I was just mentioning. But it's saying that I guess currently just the physician, meaning the abortionist, written certification is all that's required. So just the abortionist saying so, no additional proof such as a police report or any forensic evidence or anything like that. So this is interesting because, it's one thing to see how far people are willing to fight on the conviction of protecting human life. But then another thing to just say, okay, what is the law that is currently on the books? And can you at least enforce that? And that seems to be a massive problem here. I did look at the the executive order from Governor Braun that you mentioned during the break, and it seems quite strong in its wording. So the fact that it's not actually happening, that people aren't actually acting on it, seems very, very distressing, discouraging, but also, I guess, have there been that as you look at, as you reflect on what has taken place since this this partial ban has gone into effect in Indiana, has there been any prosecutions, any penalties of violating this law, or according to the state government and the health department, have all the abortionists been completely following the law? What is the enforcement mechanism even? Does it depend on the abortionist? Actually, I don't know. I guess anything that you can mention to this on the enforcement mechanism or any violations that have already taken place.
As far as I know, there's been no enforcement work, no complaints submitted about anything that's happened post our ban going into effect. And on our part, we haven't seen any data, so our hands are kind of tied. And in the hearing that we had last week, the preliminary injunction hearing, the AG's office called someone who worked an investigator in the Attorney General's office, and she testified that she had not, in her time there, they had not heard anything from the health department about an issue that needed to be investigated. And so this is definitely a concern. Well, there is one case of a law-breaking thing being investigated that did not come from a TPR. So I got a tip that an abortion facility in Indianapolis was shutting down. I called a reporter that I knew, and I said, you should break this story. It's a good thing that this clinic is shutting down. He called the clinic to confirm that it was closing. He posed as a transgender man seeking an abortion, and the receptionist called. She told him she'd call him back. She called him back from her personal phone and said that she had taken drugs from the facility and she would sell them to him from her home for $500 if he could be there tonight to get an abortion. And we ended up, based on that call, and it's a really disturbing call, and you can look it up. Real News Michiana is the reporter that made that call. It was clear that she had thought this through, and I wouldn't be surprised if she hadn't done this before. Like the way she talked about forging documentation about removing the medication, was she had definitely done this before. And so that's an indication that illegal stuff is happening within the Indiana abortion industry. We found that out essentially by accident. But there have been, from the health department's perspective, no enforcement that we know of since the ban went into effect.
Yeah, to me, I think I got to say it seems like a case where this falls at the feet of the governor, in the respect that he is one person that could actually make moves to get this whole thing changed, where the legislation is a whole process and everything. But Governor Braun can say, hey, why isn't my executive order being enforced? What's going on here, right? And he can ask his attorney general, what's going on here? He could get on that. He could even appoint or bring about some sort of like a pro-life czar or something to say, I'm going to make you the point person. You make sure this gets enforced. There's things that Governor Braun could do. They would be maybe rather innovative in the sense that nobody else seems to care much. There are no other executives that are taking action to make sure that their pro-life laws are being enforced in their state. So he really would have to have that conviction and be willing to move forward on it. I hope he does. I hope maybe he will consider making some moves like that. But anything else that you can think of in terms of problem solving, how can this be fixed in the state of Indiana as possibly a model for other states?
We built a relationship with the Braun administration. Prior to him even taking office, we were meeting with his team and telling them, like, day one, you need to ensure that these reports are released, because that was the issue previously. Is our past governor, Holcomb, we weren't able to get anywhere with people in his administration in terms of having telling the health department what to do. Because in Indiana, the governor has jurisdiction over the health department. And so it would have been in his control to do something about this, but he didn't. And so building a relationship with Braun's team, and especially with the lawsuit, the preliminary injunction, which we'll see if that's issued, preventing the release of TPRs, we're definitely going to look into more creative ways that the law can be enforced without public access to these records, talking to the Attorney General's office. But in terms of what other people could do who are facing issues within the state, well, for one, it's kind of simple, but talking to your legislators about it. Whenever I talked to aides from Braun's office about this TPR issue, they had no idea what was going on. They've got a ton of stuff going on. They kind of see this as a minor issue sometimes. So educating your public officials about the importance of abortion reporting and enforcement can make a difference, because that led to him issuing that executive order. So maybe you could do that in your state.
Yeah, terrific. Very helpful stuff here today from Melanie Lyon, Executive Director of Voices for Life, voicesforlife.com. They're doing so much good there in the state of Indiana as a model for all of us of how to really be effective locally in your state as we continue to fight to the day when this is going to be we'll be abortion free throughout our nation, but the fight is on right now. And so we're going to be back with more from Melanie Lyon in just a moment. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Melanie Lyon, Executive Director of Voices for Life, a phenomenal pro-life group in the state of Indiana, voicesforlife.com. Now, we've been talking a lot today about the enforcement piece that Voices for Life is so effective on, but even beyond this, there's so much more that Voices for Life does. Melanie, can you speak to what the door-to-door program is looking like currently, when, you know, in the context of what's going on in Indiana currently with the current law and everything? Still, you guys have the goal. You're not giving up. You're pushing forward, knocking on every door that you can throughout the state. What does that look like? What is the focus of the message that your team is bringing as you go door to door currently?
Our door-to-door team, they both educate about the dangers of abortion, the horrific things that abortion does to preborn children and their mothers, and then share local resources. People in general rarely change their mind in the course of one conversation. So our goal is really to plant seeds to get the conversation going. So we have a door hanger that has information. Specifically, we focus on the abortion pill because that's increasingly the leading type of abortion procedure. And even in a state like Indiana with restrictions, it's really easy to get online. So our door hanger has information about the horrific nature of the abortion pill and what it does to moms and babies. And then in the back, it has local resources. And so we end every conversation with, hopefully I got you thinking, hopefully I planted some seeds, you should continue doing more research on this. But here's a list of safe places to go if you or someone you know is ever in a crisis situation. Because don't go to one of these abortion facilities with these terrible inspection reports or these doctors with X amount of violations. This is a place like Women's Care Center is the big PRC in Indiana. This is a safe place that you can go for free health care that'll respect the dignity of the whole family, mom, dad, and baby. And this is such a focus for us because even though we are in a pretty restricted abortion state, we're surrounded by abortion haven states in Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. The average drive for a woman to an abortion clinic in Indiana is about just an hour and a half. And the Guttmacher Institute sent out a report last year that showed data that 7,000 Indiana women had traveled from the state to one of these 3 states to receive abortions. And that was only in Planned Parenthood locations. So that number is significantly higher. And then that's not to mention pill abortions. And that number is comparable to the number of abortions that were happening in Indiana pre-ban, about 8,000 to 9,000 a year. And so we can't reach people really at abortion facilities, at least in Indiana. And so we need to go to them. You always say meet people where they're at. That's exactly where we're going. And our hope is that by educating people about the injustice of abortion and sharing local resources, that we're preemptively doing the work. So if they have an unplanned pregnancy, their first call is going to be to the hotline that's on the door hanger, because they already have that information, and not Googling illegal abortion pills near me or what have you. Just on Saturday, we hit our 10,000th door, which is a huge milestone for our team. Currently, we have canvassing teams in 3 counties in Indiana, and our goal over the next 5 years is to hit every door in Indiana and just get as much of the pro-life message out as we can, so we can work on preventing this out-of-state abortion trafficking in the best way that we can.
Yeah, outstanding. So encouraging to hear what you're doing there. And any best practices here if somebody wanted to try to get something like this going where they are, I remember, in building up the sidewalk ministry, there always would be the debate, hey, maybe we should give a stipend to like college age students because we want to get them out here, and, they could use a little help to get out here and all of that, versus, you want to kind of keep the purity of the thing and just have it pure volunteer. But I guess when it comes to the door-to-door outreach, what have you found is most effective? Are these total volunteers that you have doing this, or anything else that you want to share that could just be helpful best practices?
I did door-to-door with a previous organization. We did pay people. We're able to reach the same numbers with volunteers, and we're able to have more success in terms of people providing more availability and showing up to shifts with volunteers. And I think the reason that is because you want people who are extremely committed to the cause. I mean, I'm a paid pro-life employee. I'm not against in a moral sense paying people to do pro-life work. But when it comes to a ministry like this, we've had more success in just getting people who are doing it because they're completely committed. When we started doing this, there was a lot of pushback because people were like, well, it's a scary thing to go talk to strangers about abortion, go on someone's doorstep. You never know who's going to answer the door. It's hard enough to get pro-life people to go to rallies or to pray outside Planned Parenthood. How are you going to get people to be able to do this sort of really difficult work? And how we've had success, and how anyone who wants to try this would probably have success, is by peer-to-peer recruitment. So actually, a majority of our canvassers are young men. 3 or 4 of them were friends of mine. I trained them. They went out. They go out on Saturday mornings. Most of them work 9-to-5 jobs, and they talk to people about abortion. It was scary, but they did it, and they saw how impactful it was. And so they invited a friend, and then that man invited a friend, and then someone else invited a friend. And that's how we've been able to grow the program organically. It's just people coming in, buying in, seeing how effective it is, and then inviting their friend to come and do it with them. And sometimes they'll go out for coffee or drinks after, make it a social thing. Another thing that's been helpful for us is engaging people from different age groups. So most of our canvassers are either young people, mostly young men my age who don't have families yet, or older retired people who have extra time on their hands. And I've seen just a really beautiful, we don't see a lot in our culture, a lot of times people from different age groups working together towards a common goal. But to see Joseph Harvey, who's a 28-year-old computer tech working with Janelle Benjamin, who's a 70-year-old woman who got arrested in the 80s for abortion clinic sit-ins. Seeing them work together and changing hearts and minds together just based on their different gifts has been just a really beautiful thing to see. So yeah, my recommendations would be building a core group, even if it's small, and then having them recruit their friends and getting them to buy in, and then you'll kind of see growth organically. We really just started with 1 or 2 people that were willing to do it consistently, and I just trained 2 people last week. We've got about 30 to 40 people that are trained, and most of them will do it at least a couple times a year.
Wow, amazing. Melanie Lyon, what an inspiration. Thank you so much for coming on, giving us this great update today, and equipping us more, educating us more, sharing the best practices of what you're finding there in Indiana. Greatly appreciate it. And anything else that you want to share with us as a final comment, final encouragement today?
I would encourage you we're very active on social media. If you're there at Voices for Life Official on Instagram and Facebook, we've received a significant amount of backlash for the lawsuits. Tons of people accusing us of wanting women's private medical information so that we can dox women or doctors. So I would encourage you to follow us on social media and comment when you can supportively, and keep our attorneys and our staff and our door-to-door team in your prayers as we fight on the front lines here in Indiana.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, the Facebook and Instagram handle at Voices for Life Official, at Voices for Life Official, the website, voicesforlife.com. Yes, pray, support Voices for Life, whatever you can do. This is a phenomenal work of God that has taken place here in Indiana with Melanie Lyon and her team there. And just what a blessing. So we've got to support these good efforts and keep building those good efforts wherever you are, whatever you can do, whatever you're called to do. Pray and work. Let's keep pushing. God bless you all.